Apparently I'm live. Can someone let me know if this is working? Because this is my first time doing this. Oh yeah, it looks like I am. Okay. I tried it out earlier today, it worked, and so hopefully it'll work for the whole hour. If it doesn't, there's nothing I can do about it because I have no idea what I'm doing. My name is Sean. I think there's a few people on who probably haven't met me yet. So just quickly, since it's not even quite 7, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Sean Tooten. I am a doctor of Oriental medicine. I've been practicing for 18 years now. And I practice in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico. I used to have a nice practice in Providence, Rhode Island until late last year when I finally closed that up. Hey, you guys, thanks for letting me know that it's working. And I do a lot of teaching. I teach all around the world. Just recently, I taught in Australia for the month of November and had a bunch of teaching plans for this year, but those all got moved or rescheduled for obvious reasons. So I thought I'd try this because I'm bored and stuck at home like all of you, and love talking about Chinese medicine. But I've never taught for non-practitioners before. This is actually the first time I'll ever have taught a class or done any kind of presentation for people who aren't practitioners. So that's going to be a little bit new for me, and hopefully it goes well. I guess we'll see. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the intuition and how that hey Shani, how that works in Chinese medicine. But because I know there's people on here, hey Vic, that don't have any experience studying Chinese medicine, we have to kind of go over some of the basics so that all of this kind of fits into a context that'll make some sense to you. And so there's 2 main assumptions that we have to make for this to fit together, right? And those are kind of the fundamental assumptions of Chinese medicine. You don't have to believe this. You just have to sort of accept it for the purpose of this talk. And those fundamental assumptions are that we are here for a purpose, right? That we're alive, that our lives have a kind of specific meaning and purpose, and that we're here to make that purpose manifest in the world, so that we both have it and that it's the goal of the spirit in this lifetime to make that purpose manifest, to create that in some way in the world. And there's 3 key organ systems in Chinese medicine. Hi, Casey. That are essential for, hey, Sam, that are essential for understanding how the intuition functions in Chinese medicine. This is the water element, the earth element, and the fire element. All of the organs in Chinese medicine are organized into elements. There's 2 organs per element, except in the case of fire, because that's a little screwy, but we won't get into that. And the first one we're going to talk about is the water element. So this comprises the kidney and the bladder in Chinese medicine. And remember, there's not a direct correlation between Chinese medicine and Western medicine as far as what these organs are and what they do. So the water element in Chinese medicine governs inherited traits. This is the stuff that you came in with and you can't, do anything about it, right? So this is your DNA, your genetics, your genetic code, your ancestry, your heritage, I would argue things like ancestral trauma or genocides, things like that, are all housed, excuse me, are all housed in the water element. Just like the code is held in your genome, right, your genetic code, that stuff is held in Chinese medicine in the kidney. So the blueprint for who you're going to be, how you're built, whether you're tall, hey Megan, whether you're short, what you look like, all of these kinds of things. And I would even argue sort of where you get born into what family and those sorts of issues are a function of that information that's stored in the kidney. And the emotion associated with the water element is fear. This can be kind of simple, basic fears, right? Like there's a bear, you're about to die, the water element's going to kick into gear. So stuff like just basic survival, fears around losing one's life. But it can also be kind of deeper, more psycho-spiritual fears about not achieving one's purpose, right? So the point of your existence is housed in the kidney. It's held there. The kidney can be seen like a deep body of water, like an ocean, or it can even be seen like a like really, really, really thick ice, like a glacier, right? And that purpose, your destiny, we call it in Chinese medicine, which doesn't cut out free will, is housed there. So we have to sort of look into that place, into the what we call the lower dantian. That's like the first and second chakras, I think. But the low abdomen is kind of where that C is housed, where that purpose is sort of held. So the kidney is where you find, and this is simplified, okay, for my Chinese medicine students who are on here, don't start giving me a hard time. The kidney is where the blueprint for your sort of life path, your life purpose is held. And it's also where we hold what we call the will, which is the determination or the drive to carry out one's life purpose. So again, it's important to think about that in terms of like survival, both your existential survival, actually being alive, but also your spiritual survival, which I would argue is basically a function of how effectively you carry out your life's purpose throughout the course of your life. So the kidney is the yin organ, the more internal organ, the deeper organ, the more receptive organ. Yin organs hold important stuff, important substances. In this case, the will or the blueprint or the jing, essence, we call it. Yang organs are more exterior. They do stuff. They're like how the body functions in the world. So the yang organ connected in the water element is the bladder. And simply translated, the bladder is kind of like the nervous system, right? It's the largest channel on the body. It covers the entire back. And it's what is the most exterior channel of the system. So it's what's like sending information out from us, me doing all of this stuff with my arms, right? While I talk, my facial expressions, these things are all governed by these exterior channels and the bladder in particular. So the kidney to some degree is like how you know yourself at the deepest level. The bladder is how other people know you, how you present in the world, right? What you look like, how you hold yourself, all of these kinds of things. And so the bladder channel governs how we respond to fearful situations, like if there's an imminent threat, right? We'll tend to protect ourselves, right? Clench up our shoulders, turn our back toward whatever the threat is. And that's just a function of the bladder's need to protect the system from any ongoing threats. The kidney does so by ramping up the adrenal gland response, right? So all of your stress hormones that ramp up anytime there's any kind of threat are essentially a function of the kidney. It's more complicated than that, but for the sake of what we're doing. And so these fears, either of existential fears or of not achieving one's life purpose, they make the bladder or the nervous system overactive, consciously on edge, constantly kind of wary, right? Traumatized by every sound, every car backfiring, right? PTSD falls into the category of the bladder channel problems. So you see that a lot with vets who are hypersensitized to every little thing around them, right? It leaves your nervous system overactive and it leaves your adrenal glands exhausted. So the threats to the bladder are like existential, like I've said: war, violence, threats, abuse, these kinds of situations. The damages to the kidney occur more when either yourself, so you're telling yourself this stuff, or somebody else is telling you that there are limits to your capacity or your ability to accomplish your purpose. That can be, people telling you that you'd never amount to anything. It can be financial obstacles, right, to your desires. Right? Thinking about like high level athletes, that stuff requires a lot of money, right? And not everybody has all the financial wherewithal to do it, right? Those kinds of things undermine the kidney's relationship to its own sense of itself, to our sense of our purpose, to our sense of meaning, to our sense of why we're here and what we're doing. And the more that gets undermined, the more the kidney becomes damaged. It becomes sort of less sure of itself. Right? Not as sort of, we call it being hardened, like ice is hard, right? Solid, right? It becomes sort of flaccid, weak. So that's the kidney and bladder. Hopefully that makes some sense. We're going to move on to the earth element. So that's the water element. The earth element is comprised of the spleen, which really means the pancreas. Spleen doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just a bad translation issue. The spleen and the stomach. And so where the water element is all of the stuff that you came in with, your inherited traits about who you are. The earth element is where we house all of your acquired traits. So this is basically who you become as a result of ingesting the world, for lack of a better way to say it, right? Ingesting experience, ingesting food, ingesting nourishment, both physical and psychological. All of that gets ingested through the spleen and stomach. So this would be things that are affecting your development based on like your home life, your family life, your community, your social systems, all of the acquired kind of social mores and things that we pick up is all a function of the earth element. Your epigenetics, so changes to your genetic structure that's based on environmental exposure, environmental to chemicals, environmental exposure to environmental things in food, and to your environment, right? How well or not you were supported growing up and continue to be supported and loved as an adult. So the stomach part of this, the yang part, the more exterior part, which is pretty much the same in Chinese medicine as in the West, right? You put stuff in your mouth, you eat it, and there it is in your stomach. It's about the ingestion of that, the taking in of it, both physical and experiential. People who do a lot of like bodybuilding or working out and primarily kind of like work on their back, they're trying to protect themselves via the bladder channel, via the channel of protection from the world. People who are like kind of obsessed with the core and their abdominals, this is also a stance of protection. They're trying to protect themselves from ingesting, from experiencing painful, difficult, stimuli from the world. And the stomach is so cool in Chinese medicine. The stomach has a natural intelligence. It's called the yi, Y-E. Sorry, I'm distracted by text messages. I should have turned that off. So this natural intelligence guides our preferences, like the basic preferences, not our judgments about them. There's no judgment about it, just what you actually do or do not prefer, right? The example that I always use are kids, because kids don't like bitter foods. And the reason for that is the natural intelligence in the stomach. The most commonly toxic flavor in nature is bitter. So bitterness to a child indicates to their stomach's natural intelligence, this could be dangerous. I don't know about this, right? Sweet, however, is never dangerous in nature. The sweet flavor will never kill you. So what do kids love? Sweet flavor, right? Because their stomachs are smart. That the function of learning how to appreciate different flavors is something that comes later. It's okay when all your kids want to eat when they're little is like sweet and bland food. That's the stomach doing its job. It's protecting them from what they are unsure about. And then you just have to introduce different foods gradually, right? But the important thing to remember about that is that it's preference without judgment. So when a kid doesn't like bitter food, they don't think poorly of themselves for it, right? They just don't like it. It's not a judgment, it just is. And that part's what gets lost, I think, through maturation and growing and living in society into adulthood, is that just sort of natural recognition of what your own system tells you is right and wrong. This has to do with intuition, that the stomach plays a big role in kind of the functioning of your intuition. The spleen, on the other hand, is about absorbing this stuff in, so taking it in and making it part of yourself, right? The spleen governs everything that we would sort of normally think of through the digestive tract, like the absorption of nutrients through the intestinal wall. All of that's governed by the spleen in Chinese medicine. And so habituation is a big part of this. As you learn to take in nutrients, you become habituated. You're used to chicken tasting a certain way. You're used to the sweet flavor tasting a certain way. And you're used to absorbing love and experience in the way that you've come to know how to do it, right? That's a function of the spleen. So learning to eat new foods and learning to accept love and support and these other important things is kind of the same process. It's a function of habituation, and that's a function of the spleen being able to absorb that stuff into the system and making it part of ourselves. So whatever you put in here that stays in, right? The stomach is really good at vomiting stuff out that shouldn't be in there. If you eat rotten food, you're going to throw it up. That's the natural intelligence of the stomach. This isn't good. But if we ingest stuff and we force it, or it's good for us or it's bad for us, and we force it to stay in there and we absorb it, then that becomes part of us. It becomes part of our acquired traits. We become used to it. If we're absorbing abuse over a long period of time, we come to accept that as normal, right? If we're absorbing being ignored, right, or being challenged or put down, or all of these different things that can lead to trauma over the course of one's life, right? Then we absorb that into our system and it becomes part of our natural intelligence, of our acquired intelligence. We begin to believe this stuff about ourselves because we've eaten it, right? So this is a really important part that we'll get back to when we talk a little bit more specifically about intuition. So that's the fire element, what you came in with, the earth element, what you're adding to it, and then the fire element, or so I think I said the water element, what you came in with, the earth element, what you're adding to it, and then the fire element is made up of the heart and the small intestine. Don't think about digestion; has little to do with that in this context. So the fire element, I can't resist it. I'm going to try speaking French. The fire element is your joie de vivre, right? It's your animation. It's your light. It's that thing that people know to be you. It's that radiance that each of us has that kind of makes us unique. We refer to it as the spirit and the illumination with which you carry out your life purpose. So here's an important piece, which we'll talk more about in a second too. The kidney is where you store that information about your life purpose. It's like where your destiny is held. But that's in a deep, dark body of water, right? And it requires the fire element, the sun, essentially, the heart, all of these can be seen as the same, to shine brightly so that it can illuminate those depths, so that you can see clearly what that destiny is, what that purpose is. And then the heart, by the way, I just got to say, it's so weird not talking to anybody. Like having no feedback is just the most bizarre thing. I'm used to teaching rooms full of people. And I miss looking at faces. Anyway, the purpose of the heart is to set goals, right, for yourself so that you can move forward along the path that's laid out in the kidney, along the path of your destiny, right? The spirit is childlike, really. The heart is sort of perfect. The spirit is perfect. It's not really the spirit that's going on the journey. It's the body that's going on the journey of this lifetime. The spirit is like divine. And it's very childlike. So it's really innocent and pure, right? The heart doesn't have any of these issues of restraining itself or censoring itself. It is no different than it was when you were 4 years old, 3 years old, and you got excited by something. You saw a butterfly and you went crazy and ran after it, right? The adult heart works exactly the same way. So there's this really like pure childlike quality to it, which just wants to do what it's here to do. And usually that's not like go work in an office for 8 to 10 hours a day, It wants to love your kids. It wants to make music. It wants to make art. It wants to stare at pretty things. It wants to be awed by the beauty, right? It wants all of the stuff that you wanted when you were 4 and everything was fine, right? Before, life took over. The small intestine, on the other hand, is like the communications director. There are very few channels that have a connection to the brain, and the small intestine is one that has a connection to the brain via another channel. It doesn't directly connect to it, but thanks, Yvette. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, all of you. I appreciate